I'm going to ask everybody to indulge me for a second. I want to play you something, but before I do, I want to issue you with a warning that it's going to be distressing for some of you.
Talk about activity of those people. There will be always, yes, it is freedom of speech, but. And the turning point is but. Why do we still say but when we...
I do apologize if that distressed anyone in the room. That is the audio from the Copenhagen shooting. And the shooter chose chillingly the moment to let loose a volley of shots just as the speaker was making the point that when people pretend to defend freedom of speech, they caveat it with the word but. And he decided to choose that moment to let off the shots. He then went, as we all know, to a synagogue and killed some innocent Jewish people. Before that, it was in France at the kosher shop. And before that, it was in Belgium at the museum. And I really want to, first of all, congratulate all of you for being here today, because that was a cafe. This is a synagogue. They had security outside the cafe. They had close protection for the cartoonist. And yet, despite that, this incident occurred. And so it could just as easily occur in London. It could occur here at this very synagogue. And the sheer fact that all of you are here this evening is a testament to your own bravery, to your own courage, to your own determination, to refuse to cower in the face of this terrorism, and to say, by voting with your actions and your feet, never again. Because something we learnt after the rise of Nazism in Germany was of the danger of the banality of evil. What we learned is that if we allow ourselves to sleepwalk into an atmosphere in which people feel uncomfortable to speak their minds, in which people are slowly taken out, group by group, one by one, and this sort of obfuscation that we just heard is used. Instead of calling a spade, people say it's not anti-Semitism, it's community tension. It's not about freedom of speech, but if we allow ourselves to sleepwalk into that climate without standing firm and strong and drawing a line, as we are doing here this evening, drawing a line in the sand and refusing to be coward, then before we know it, it will be too late. Because the question that we were here to address this evening is, have we reached crisis point? Well, I'll ask you to answer that question based upon the recording that you've just heard. If in Europe today, people are speaking in synagogues or in cafes or in libraries, and they're talking about freedom of speech as the subject, or about anti-Semitism as the subject for discussion that evening, and they feel scared to even enter the hall because they're worried that somebody's going to attack them merely for speaking, then I'd argue that that is a level of crisis point, because the very foundation of democracy it rests upon a few points. One of them is the right to express yourself, because without the right to express yourself, you cannot campaign for the political party you represent. You cannot go and vote for the party of your choice. You cannot hold those in authority above us to account for their mistakes. All of that rests upon freedom of speech. And then secondly, to protect the minorities. Because as we've just heard, we must judge the worth, the merit of any society by how much it protects those who are the most vulnerable within it. We're dealing proportionately, not only by the assessment of our security services, but also by all the statistics that look into this and by the monitoring services. Anti-Semitic attacks are proportionately far, far, far higher. It's not even one level higher, 3 times the level of attacks against Muslims. They are far higher. And proportionately, the risk to the safety in our societies, we have to be frank and candid about this, they come from the threat of jihadist attacks. They do not come from, proportionately, from far-right neo-Nazi extremists wanting to blow up synagogues and what have you. That is a challenge. It is a threat. But I'm talking about proportionately where the focus of the main problem is coming from. So when President Obama gave this speech, he said, we will not allow these people to claim they are religious leaders. They have nothing to do with Islam. No. They are not Islam, the Islam. Of course they're not. Nor am I, nor is anyone really, because Islam is what Muslims make it. But they have something to do with Islam. They have something to do with it. If you're going to argue with one of them, and I do all the time, you're not discussing Mein Kampf. You're discussing Islamic texts. They have something to do with Islam, and the danger of not naming it, what I call the Islamist ideology. And just one sentence, what is Islamism? Islam is a religion. Islamism is the desire to impose any version of that religion over society. President Obama in his speech said there's an ideology we must challenge, and he didn't name it. So, think about it. You're sending out the message to the vast majority of Americans, there's an ideology you must challenge, but then you don't tell them what's it called. What are they going to assume? The average American is going to think, yeah, I've got to challenge an ideology. It's called Islam. You're only going to increase anti-Muslim hatred, like he who must not be named. You'll increase the hysteria, the Voldemort effect, I call it, by not naming the ideology, because the average guy out there will then assume the president is talking about the religion itself. But if you distinguish Islamist extremism and say, look, Islam's a religion, we're not going to tell you what good and bad Islam is. We're not going to define that for you. What we can say is you mustn't try and impose that on anyone else. If you do, that's called Islamism, the ideology. And that's what we have a problem with. Unless you make that distinction and isolate the people that you're challenging, the average non-Muslim out there in the world who doesn't know that will think, yes, we've got to challenge the religion, all Muslims are bad, let's drive them out of Europe. So actually, it doesn't do us any favors not to name this ideology. And with that, I'll end because I have someone far better than me who's waiting to speak.